Close your eyes for a moment, or don't. Just let your gaze soften. Let the edges of the room blur slightly. Notice where you are. The light, the air, the faint sounds that almost aren't sounds at all. Before you form a thought about this space, your body already has. Long before language, long before logic, your nervous system has made a decision. Safe or not, this happens every day. In every room you enter, at every doorway you cross, and you are almost never aware of it. A cafe can feel like an exhale. A hallway can feel like a held breath. A childhood kitchen can calm you in seconds. A fluorescent corridor can tighten something in your chest before you know why. The mind thinks it is in control, but the body reads first. Tonight, we are going to slow that process down. We are going to follow the signal from the moment you step across a threshold down into the oldest, quietest structures of the brain, into systems that evolved long before modern buildings, long before cities, long before words. The science behind this is precise. It is measurable, and it is ancient. There is no rush. Let's begin where your body begins, in the instant before you think. Imagine you are arriving somewhere unfamiliar. It doesn't matter where exactly. A house you are visiting for the first time, perhaps. Someone else's apartment. A waiting room. A hotel room in a city you don't know well. You push the door open, or it opens for you, and you step inside. And something happens. It isn't a thought. It comes before thought, the way a sound arrives before you can name it. The body registers the space before the mind has had time to form a coherent sentence about it. There is a slight adjustment in your chest. Your shoulders may shift almost imperceptibly, dropping or rising, depending on what the room is telling them. Your breathing may change, shallowing or deepening by a fraction of a second per breath. Your eyes move in a particular pattern, scanning without apparent intent, touching the corners and the exits and the ceiling and the texture of the walls, gathering data at a speed that conscious thought cannot match. You don't decide to do any of this. It simply happens. And depending on what the room is, depending on what signals it is emitting, the quality of the light, the dimension of the space, whether there are sources of sound you can identify or ones you can't locate, whether the ceiling is high above you or pressing down, whether you can see all four corners or whether there are hidden areas behind you. Depending on all of this and more, your body will have already filed its verdict before your mind has finished walking through the door. Safe. Unsafe. Something in between that registers as a low background vigilance. Not fear exactly, but not rest either. This verdict happens extraordinarily fast. Research from the University Complutense of Madrid and the Polytechnic University of Madrid, published in Nature Neuroscience, demonstrated that electrical responses to threatening visual stimuli can be detected in the human amygdala in under 100 milliseconds. Under 1/10 of a second. The word you are reading right now took longer to register as a word than it takes your amygdala to begin processing whether a space is dangerous. By the time you consciously think, I don't know if I like this room, the verdict has already been handed down several floors below consciousness, in neural architecture that preceded the evolution of language by hundreds of millions of years. This is not a flaw. This is the entire point. Your body is performing a continuous environmental audit, one that it has been performing since long before anyone had language to describe the feeling of stepping into a dark cave versus standing in an open meadow at dusk. The audit is not paranoid. It is not anxious. It is simply efficient. It is an extraordinarily refined system for gathering environmental information at a rate that conscious thought cannot achieve, and using that information to calibrate your internal state. The question, the one that should keep us awake, or in this case, carry us gently towards sleep, is how does it actually work? When you walk into a room and feel uneasy without knowing why, what is happening inside you? What is reading what? Which parts of the brain are talking to which other parts, and in what sequence? And why does this system sometimes get it right and sometimes get it wrong, mistaking a safe place for a threatening one or settling into comfort somewhere that perhaps does not quite deserve it? That is what we are going to explore tonight, slowly, without rushing, because there is something quietly astonishing about the fact that your nervous system has an opinion about every room you've ever been in, and that opinion is the product of evolution, architecture, memory, and a nerve that wanders all the way from your brainstem to the deepest part of your abdomen. Let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning of you, but the beginning of the signal. The moment you cross the threshold. The moment before thought. The moment the body begins to listen. You have been walking into rooms your entire life, and every single time, the same cascade has begun. It begins before you are aware of it. It begins in structures of the brain that are, in geological terms, ancient parts that were present and functional in the ancestors of mammals, long before the extraordinary expansion of the human cortex gave rise to language, to planning, to the particular gift and burden of self-reflection. The first impressions your nervous system takes of a space are sensory, and they arrive almost simultaneously: visual information, auditory information, olfactory information, proprioceptive information about the temperature and humidity of the air, information about the surfaces you might touch, information about whether the space is above or below ground, information about scale and proportion and the acoustic quality of the room's emptiness or fullness. All of this arrives at once, or as close to at once as the biology allows, and it is processed in parallel streams, each feeding into the others, each contributing to the single continuous experience of being in a place and having a feeling about it. And that feeling, that immediate prelinguistic bodily feeling, is not optional. It is happening to you right now, wherever you are as you listen to these words. Your nervous system is reading the room, quietly, constantly, without asking your permission. The extraordinary thing is not that this happens. The extraordinary thing is how precisely it happens, how exquisitely calibrated the system is, and how deeply its calibrations are rooted in something far older than any individual memory or personal history. And this cascade of body before mind is something that deserves to be sat with for a moment before we move on, because it challenges something most of us implicitly believe about ourselves: that we are thinking creatures first and feeling creatures second, that our experience of the world moves from the rational outward to the emotional, that we assess and then we feel. But what happens when you step across a threshold tells a different story entirely. The body is first. The body is always first. The rational mind, the cortex, with its language and its analysis and its capacity for nuanced deliberation, arrives late to the assessment of every room you have ever entered. It inherits a verdict that was already filed in the amygdala and the brainstem and the vagus nerve, and in the complex tangle of signals moving between your internal organs and your brain. By the time you can articulate, there is something off about this place. You have already been in a particular physiological state for several seconds. A state that has already affected your breathing, your heart rate, your muscle tension, your blood chemistry. Understanding this, really understanding it at a gut level, which is perhaps the only level where this understanding fully lands, changes something about how you inhabit spaces. It gives you a kind of compassion for your own discomfort in certain environments. It explains the irrationality of finding a perfectly safe waiting room threatening, or a modest corner of an ordinary cafe profoundly comforting. There is no irrationality in it. The system is simply responding to what it finds. And it finds what hundreds of millions of years of evolution and every single experience of your particular life have together taught it to read as significant. There is an intelligence in the body's reading of space that the rational mind cannot fully override, and probably should not try to. The question is not how to stop the body from scanning. The question is how to understand what it is scanning for, and how the world around us either serves or frustrates those ancient needs. Let us go further in. Let's get closer to the actual biology. The central question, what makes a place feel safe? Before we descend into the specific biology of all this, let's hold the central question in its simplest form for a moment, because the simplicity of it is worth sitting with. Why does the nervous system decide a place is safe or unsafe within seconds of encountering it? And the answer, the true scientific, deeply researched answer, is that it is not a decision at all. Not in the way we usually think of decisions. There is no moment of deliberation, no weighing of options, no executive function involved, at least not in those first crucial milliseconds. What happens is better described as a detection, or perhaps a reading, in the way a thermometer reads temperature. Not deciding what the temperature is, but registering a fact about the environment that already exists. The distinction between deciding and detecting is more than semantic. Carries weight. When we think of something as a decision, we assume it can be overridden by reasoning, that we can talk ourselves out of it, that logic has authority over it. And in the realm of safety perception, logic has remarkably little authority, at least in the initial moments. You can stand in a room and know intellectually that it is perfectly safe. You can enumerate the reasons there is nothing to fear. You can remind yourself that you are an adult, that the shadows in the corners are just shadows, that the low hum of the ventilation system is merely mechanical. And yet the autonomic state that the room has already induced in you, the slight elevation in heart rate, the shallow breath, the particular quality of alertness that has settled into your muscles, that state is not easily talked down, because it was not talked up in the first place. It arose from a process that bypasses language entirely. This is a pattern that emerges consistently in the neuroscience. The body's safety assessment is fast, preconscious, and not easily reversed by conscious reasoning. The cortex, the thinking brain, can eventually exert some modulation, can calm the initial response, can provide reassurance that the threat signal was a false positive. But this modulation comes after the fact, arrives late to a party the body started without it, and operates with considerably less authority than most of us would like to believe we have over our own internal states. This matters not only philosophically but practically. It is the reason why knowing something is safe is not the same as feeling safe. It is the reason why rational reassurance, "There is nothing to be afraid of here," is often far less effective than simply changing the environment itself. Moving to a different room, adjusting the light, sitting in a different chair, allowing the body to receive a different set of signals. And it is the reason why, when we think about creating conditions for genuine rest and recovery, we cannot confine our attention to the content of our thoughts. We have to attend to the room. The nervous system detects environmental conditions. It reads cues: physical, acoustic, olfactory, social. And based on those cues, it shifts state. Not chooses to shift state, simply shifts. The way a thermostat shifts in response to temperature. The way a barometer responds to pressure. Except you are not a thermostat. You are a being with memory, with history, with a childhood spent in specific rooms that taught your nervous system what safe smells like and what danger sounds like. You are a being whose cultural context has layered its own meaning over the raw sensory data. You are a being whose individual experience has calibrated the system in ways both shared with every other human who ever lived and utterly particular to you. So the answer is both universal and individual. There are cues that almost every human nervous system reads the same way. Certain acoustic frequencies that register as threatening, certain lighting conditions that trigger vigilance, certain proportions of space that feel protective or exposing. And there are cues that are deeply personal. The specific quality of afternoon light in a room where you once felt very loved, the sound of a particular kind of rain against glass that means safety because it always meant insideness, warmth, being sheltered. Both are real, both matter, and both are mediated by the same extraordinary biological machinery. Let's begin with the machinery itself. Somewhere deep inside the temporal lobe of your brain, on both sides, there is a small almond-shaped structure. In Latin, almond is amygdala, and so that is what we call it. It is approximately the size of a grape. It has been there in some form in vertebrate brains for somewhere in the vicinity of 500 million years. A staggering duration, an almost incomprehensible continuity across species and evolutionary time. The amygdala is the brain's threat detector, or more precisely, and the distinction matters, it is the structure that assigns emotional and motivational significance to sensory information. It is a relevance tagger, an urgency assessor. It does not experience fear the way conscious awareness experiences fear. It doesn't feel anything in the subjective sense. What it does is process incoming sensory signals and determine, at extraordinary speed, whether those signals suggest something that requires an immediate response. When you walk into a room that feels wrong, the amygdala is among the first structures to know it. The speed at which this happens is genuinely remarkable. The research from the University Complutense of Madrid and Polytechnic University of Madrid, using intracranial electrode measurements in patients who had electrodes implanted to monitor epilepsy, found that the amygdala could generate an electrical response to threatening visual stimuli in under 100 milliseconds. Less than 1/10 of a second. This is well before the visual cortex has fully processed the scene, well before conscious awareness has formed, well before you would have any ability to report having seen anything at all. This ultra-fast pathway works because sensory information traveling to the brain takes two routes simultaneously. The first route, the longer one, goes from the sensory organs up through the thalamus and into the sensory cortex, where it is processed in detail, color, texture, fine spatial relationships, context. This processing takes time. It produces the rich, detailed, consciously accessible experience of perception. The second route, shorter and faster, runs from the thalamus directly to the amygdala, bypassing the cortex altogether. Joseph Ledoux, a neuroscientist at New York University who spent much of his career studying the amygdala's role in fear, described this as a low road, a quick, imprecise emergency channel that trades accuracy for speed. The signal arriving via this low road is coarse, low resolution. Cannot tell you exactly what it saw, but it can tell you something is there that requires immediate attention, and it can begin preparing the body's response before the more detailed cortical processing has had time to finish. The elegance of this dual pathway system is its engineering logic. In a world where threats could arrive suddenly, where a predator could emerge from grass, where a hostile encounter could unfold in seconds, a system that waited for the full, detailed, consciously accessible analysis before responding would be a system that frequently responded too late. The low road ensures that the body's defenses begin mobilizing almost instantaneously, even before the threat is fully understood. The subsequent cortical processing can then either confirm the threat and intensify the response, or reassure the system that the initial alarm was unnecessary and begin dampening the physiological cascade. Both pathways are happening simultaneously, in parallel and in real time, one generating an immediate, crude response, the other providing the detail and context to refine or override that response. And in a room that contains no actual threat, the cortical pathway eventually calms the amygdala's initial alarm. But it takes time. And during that time, the body has already been in a stress state. This temporal asymmetry, the alarm firing faster than the reassurance, is one reason why anxiety about spaces can feel so persistent, and why changing your thinking about a threatening feeling environment is so much harder than it seems like it should be. The alarm is faster. The reassurance is slower. The body has a head start on the nervous system's own process of evaluation. There is also a third factor that makes the amygdala's response highly personal and not merely objective: memory. The amygdala interacts continuously with the hippocampus, the brain's primary structure for forming, storing, and retrieving memories, particularly memories of space and context. These two structures are anatomically adjacent, deeply interconnected, and work together in ways that make the amygdala's responses highly sensitive to personal history. When you encounter a spatial environment that resembles, in any sensory dimension, an environment where you previously experienced threat, the amygdala draws on that stored association. The response it fires is not purely a measurement of the current environment. It is partially a retrieval of the emotional state associated with a remembered environment. The room is read through the lens of every previous room it resembles. This is why a space can feel wrong in a way that seems disproportionate to anything objectively threatening about it. The amygdala has recognized a pattern, a quality of light, a kind of sound, a particular spatial proportion that matches something in its archive of threat-associated experiences. And it is responding not to the current room, but to the category of room that the current room resembles. Conversely, this is why a room can feel profoundly safe in a way that also exceeds anything obviously safe about it. The amygdala has recognized a pattern that matches something in its archive of comfort and security, and it responds accordingly, initiating not an alarm but a standing down. A relaxation of vigilance that is the neurological signature of arriving somewhere that the nervous system knows. This is why you can flinch before you know what you're flinching from. This is why you can feel unsettled in a room before you can identify what in the room is unsettling you. The low road has already filed its report. The cortex is still working on the details. More recent research, including work published in Trends in Cognitive Sciences by Keel and Lee in 2023, has further complicated and enriched this picture. These researchers proposed that the sensory cortex itself, not just the amygdala, plays a crucial role in threat evaluation, and that the cortex stores long-term memory representations of threat, sculpted by past experience. This means that what we think of as initial threat detection is also informed by learned associations. The brain is not only reading raw sensory data, it is matching that data against stored templates of what has historically been dangerous or safe. This has a beautiful implication. Your nervous system's reading of a room is not just an objective measurement of the room itself. It is partly a conversation between the room and your history. The space presents its signals. Your nervous system matches those signals against everything it has learned, from birth and before, about what those kinds of signals have tended to mean. The room and your past are in dialogue, faster than thought, deeper than language. But the amygdala's speed is only part of the story, because the amygdala does not operate alone. It is embedded in a network, a broader threat processing system that includes the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the bed nucleus of the stria terminalis, and several structures in the brainstem. And this network, working together, does not merely detect threats. It prepares the body to respond to them. When the amygdala fires a threat signal, it communicates through cascading neural pathways with the hypothalamus, which begins preparing the body's stress response. The hypothalamus activates the sympathetic nervous system, which begins releasing stress hormones, primarily adrenaline and cortisol, into the bloodstream. The heart rate increases, breathing shallows and quickens. Blood is diverted from the digestive system and toward the large muscle groups. The pupils dilate to allow more light in. Attention narrows, focusing on the potential source of threat. You are, within seconds of entering a room that feels wrong, already in a different physiological state than you were 30 seconds ago. Your muscles are slightly more tense. Your breath is slightly more shallow. Your perception has narrowed. You are scanning more actively, with a specific quality of attention that is vigilant rather than curious, alert rather than receptive. And the extraordinary thing is that none of this required a decision. It was a physiological cascade, initiated by a structure that responds to environmental signals at a speed that consciousness cannot match, prepared to act before the thinking mind has had time to think. The amygdala, in this sense, is not the enemy of calm. It is the guardian of survival. The question is not how to silence it, but how to understand the conditions under which it quiets itself. Because the same system that fires an alarm can also register safety, can also shift into a state of rest, can also, under the right conditions, the right light, the right acoustics, the right spatial proportions, the right resonance with remembered comfort, stand down. And when it stands down, something extraordinary happens in the body. Something that feels, from the inside, like exhaling after a long-held breath. In 1994, a neuroscientist named Stephen Porges introduced a concept that would quietly become one of the most useful frameworks in the neuroscience of safety. He called it neuroception, and the name is deliberate, a careful distinction from perception. Perception, as we typically understand it, is conscious. It involves awareness. You perceive something when you are aware of perceiving it. Neuroception is different. Neuroception describes how neural circuits distinguish whether situations or people are safe, dangerous, or life-threatening, and crucially, it takes place in primitive parts of the brain without our conscious awareness. The detection of a place, a person, or a situation as safe or dangerous triggers neurobiologically determined responses, responses that begin before we could possibly know we are responding. The distinction is subtle but profound. When you walk into a room that feels wrong, you are not perceiving the danger. You are neuroceiving it. The process precedes and underpins any conscious perception that may follow. Our neuroception scans other people, our own body, and the environment for cues of safety and danger. As these cues come in, the nervous system reflexively and instantaneously shifts the autonomic nervous system state to manage the situation and optimize survival. This scanning is continuous. It does not switch off when you are busy with something else. It does not pause during conversation or rest during sleep. It is a background process running at all times beneath the ordinary flow of conscious experience, gathering environmental data and translating it into a physiological state. Porges developed this concept within a larger framework he called polyvagal theory, a theory about the organization of the autonomic nervous system and its evolutionary origins that has become one of the more influential and discussed frameworks in clinical neuroscience, though it has also received some scientific criticism regarding certain anatomical and evolutionary claims. The core insights, however, have found significant clinical traction and are increasingly supported by empirical research. The theory proposes that the autonomic nervous system, the part of the nervous system that regulates the body's involuntary functions, including heart rate, digestion, respiration, and much more, is organized hierarchically, with newer evolutionary developments layered over older ones. The oldest layer involves what Porges calls the dorsal vagal complex, a primitive circuit associated with immobilization and shutdown responses. In vertebrates, this is the most ancient system, and when activated in the face of overwhelming, inescapable threat, it produces a profound physiological deceleration, slowing of heart rate, withdrawal from engagement, in extreme cases a kind of collapse or freeze. The second layer is the sympathetic nervous system, the familiar fight-or-flight system. When the environment signals danger that can be responded to, that can be fought or fled, the sympathetic system activates. Heart rate increases. Stress hormones flood the bloodstream. The body mobilizes for action. The third and most recently evolved layer, according to Porges's theory, is what he calls the ventral vagal complex. This is the system associated with social engagement, with connection, with the physiological state of calm presence. When humans feel safe, their nervous systems support the homeostatic functions of health, growth, and restoration, while they simultaneously become accessible to others without feeling or expressing threat and vulnerability. And this third system, the newest in evolutionary terms, is the one that registers and responds to environmental cues of safety. Not the absence of danger exactly, but the active presence of safety signals. This distinction between the absence of danger and the presence of safety is one of the most important insights in all of this. They are not the same thing. A room that contains no obvious threats is not necessarily a room that signals safety to the nervous system. True physiological safety, the kind that allows the body to genuinely rest, to digest, to restore, requires positive cues, not just the absence of negative ones. Once people are given appropriate environmental cues to prompt a neuroception of safety, shifts in physiological state may occur via the ventral vagal complex, activating the social engagement system. The outcome will be increased resilience. What are those cues? What does the nervous system read as a signal of safety? Some of them are social. The facial expressions of others, the vocal prosody of the people around us, their tone, their rhythm, the musical quality of their speech rather than its literal content, physical proximity, the experience of being seen and responded to. These social signals are profoundly powerful regulators of autonomic state. But many of the cues are environmental. They are about the space itself. And this is where neuroception intersects with the built world in a way that is both practically important and philosophically remarkable. The rooms you inhabit are not neutral. They are not mere containers. They are signaling environments, broadcasting information to your nervous system at a rate and depth that your conscious mind never fully registers. And depending on what they signal, depending on their light, their scale, their acoustic properties, their proportions, their materials, their temperature, their smell, your autonomic nervous system shifts state in response. You don't choose this, but now that you know it, you can begin to understand it. Consider what it means to walk from a fluorescent-lit, low-ceilinged corridor into a room with tall windows and warm light diffusing through gauze curtains. The shift you feel is not just aesthetic preference. It is physiological. Your autonomic state is actually different in those two environments, measurably, objectively different in terms of heart rate, respiration, cortisol levels, the distribution of blood flow, the degree to which your muscles are tensed against a threat that the first environment was implicitly announcing. The room is not just a background. The room is a message. At the center of this entire system, at the center of your ability to feel safe in any space, is one of the most remarkable structures in the human body. It is a nerve, or rather two nerves, one on each side, that together constitute a single extraordinary system. It is called the vagus nerve, and the name, from the Latin for wandering, is entirely apt. The vagus nerves are the longest cranial nerves, running from the brain to the large intestine. They exit from the medulla oblongata in the lower brainstem, then pass through the neck, chest, and abdomen, branching off to the vital organs including the heart, lungs, liver, and gut along the way. The vagus nerve constitutes approximately 75% of the entire parasympathetic nervous system. It is the primary communication channel between the brain and the body's major organs. And critically, that communication runs predominantly upward. The most important function of the vagus nerve is afferent, bringing information from the inner organs, such as gut, liver, heart, and lungs, to the brain. This suggests that the inner organs are major sources of sensory information to the brain. This is the biological basis of the gut feeling. It is not a metaphor. The gut is literally sending information to the brain via the vagus nerve, and that information informs the brain's assessment of whether a situation is safe. The feeling in your stomach when you walk into a room that troubles you is part of the data stream. Your gut is a sense organ for safety. When the environment signals safety, when neuroception finds what it is looking for, the ventral vagal complex activates, and the parasympathetic nervous system takes over. Stimulation of the vagus nerves reduces heart rate, promotes healthy digestion and metabolism, increases blood flow to organs, and reduces inflammation. It makes us more calm, relaxed, and sociable. This is the state you are in right now or approaching as you listen to these words in a comfortable, quiet place. Heart rate slowing, breathing deepening, muscle tension releasing, the body orienting toward rest and restoration. It is called the rest and digest state. And it is not merely restful in a pleasant experiential sense. It is the state in which the body can do its deepest maintenance work. Cellular repair, immune function, memory consolidation, emotional processing. The state of safety physiologically is not passive. It is the state in which the most vital and restorative work of being alive gets done. When you feel safe somewhere, you are not merely comfortable. You are, in the most literal biological sense, more alive. The vagus nerve's role in registering and responding to environmental safety extends beyond the gut-to-brain signal. According to polyvagal theory, the vagus nerve has 3 branches that correspond to 3 nervous system states: ventral vagal, sympathetic, and dorsal vagal. Our nervous system constantly scans our environment for cues of safety or danger through a process called neuroception, which determines which nervous system state we are in and how we respond to stressors. What is fascinating about this from an architectural and environmental perspective is that the cues of safety that activate the ventral vagal state are not only social, they are spatial. The environment itself can trigger the parasympathetic shift, can activate, through purely physical signals, the biological conditions for rest. There is something worth pausing on here. The vagus nerve, the primary channel of parasympathetic activation, the nerve that carries the signal of rest and digest to the body's organs, is not a one-way channel. It carries approximately 80% of its information upward, from body to brain. And this means that the state of the body's internal organs is continuously feeding into the brain's assessment of the situation. When you are in a space that has activated a low-grade sympathetic response, that has slightly elevated your heart rate, shallowed your breathing, tensed your muscles, the vagus nerve is carrying that information upward to the brain. The brain receives the body's internal state as data, and that data becomes part of the environmental assessment. The brain uses the body's state to infer something about the environment. If the body is slightly tense, the brain concludes, not unreasonably, that the environment must contain some element of threat. This creates a feedback loop. A room that activates even a subtle sympathetic response perpetuates that response, because the body's own state becomes evidence that the environment is unsafe. And conversely, a room that activates the parasympathetic system, that begins to lower heart rate, deepen breathing, relax muscles, creates a feedback loop in the other direction. The body's calming becomes evidence that the environment is safe, which activates further calming, which provides further evidence of safety. This is part of why the transition from a stressful environment to a calming one can feel so profound, why stepping into a garden or a warm kitchen or a beloved room can produce a shift that feels almost immediate and much larger than the objective difference between the two environments would predict. The shift is amplified by the body's own feedback loops. Once the parasympathetic cascade begins, it tends to self-sustain. Understanding this feedback dynamic also helps explain why the bedroom environment is so consequential for sleep. A bedroom that does not signal safety, through whatever combination of light, sound, temperature, and spatial quality, will maintain the body's sympathetic activation, even subtly. And that sympathetic activation will feed back to the brain as evidence that the environment requires monitoring. The result is a nervous system that cannot fully let go, that maintains a low level of watchfulness even as the body attempts to sleep. This is why the quality of the sleep environment matters not merely for comfort, but for the biological quality of the sleep itself. The nervous system's safety assessment of the room is an active input into what kind of sleep is possible there. This is why the quality of the room matters so much. This is why the light, the sound, the scale, the materials, the temperature, why all of it lands not just in your aesthetic preference, but in your body's deepest regulatory systems. Let's go deeper into what those signals are. What rooms do to the nervous system. The study of how the built environment affects the brain has a name: neuroarchitecture. It is a relatively young field, formally established with the founding of the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture in San Diego in 2002, though the underlying questions are as old as architecture itself. The hippocampus generates cognitive maps with place cells that encode spatial positions. When a building offers clear landmarks, coherent routes, and comprehensible layouts, the brain navigates with ease. Architecture is not static. It is a constant dialogue with the nervous system, shaping our sense of safety, comfort, or stress. Let's take each of the major environmental variables one by one, because each one has a genuine and measurable effect on the nervous system's safety assessment. Light ***. Light is perhaps the most powerful single environmental variable in the nervous system's reading of a space. And the key distinction is not merely between light and darkness, but between the quality, color, temperature, and source of the light. Natural light, daylight, sunlight diffused through clouds or filtered through leaves, is a fundamentally different stimulus to the nervous system than artificial light, and specifically than fluorescent light. This is not merely aesthetic or cultural preference. It is biological. Research into the effects of light on the body's stress systems has found that bright artificial lighting, particularly light with a blue-white spectrum, significantly elevates cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. A 2020 study published in the journal Stress, involving 112 participants in a standardized sleep laboratory setting, found that bright white light exposure evoked the highest cortisol levels compared to dim white, red, or blue light. The body reads bright overhead artificial light as an arousal signal, a signal of alertness, of midday, of the time of day when threat scanning should be at its most active. This is part of why hospital corridors feel the way they do. The lighting is not designed to calm the nervous system. It is designed for visibility, for clinical function. And what it does to the autonomic state of every person moving through it is a secondary consideration that often goes unaddressed. Warm light, lower in color temperature, closer to candlelight or the orange gold of afternoon sun, signals something very different. It is closer to the light of dusk, of the firelight that has warmed human gatherings for the entirety of our species' existence. The nervous system reads it differently. There is evidence that it activates the parasympathetic system more readily, that it is associated with lower cortisol, with states of social warmth and rest. And natural light, particularly light that changes, that moves across a room as the day progresses, that is connected to the rhythms of the outdoor world, is deeply regulating. It anchors the body's circadian rhythms, which themselves are deeply tied to autonomic function, to the cycles of alertness and rest, vigilance and recovery, that the nervous system moves through over the course of a day. A room with large windows that admit daylight, that changes as the sun moves, that connects the body inside to the world outside. That room is speaking a language of safety that the nervous system has been literate in since long before we built walls. Ceiling height ***. This one surprises people. The height of the ceiling above your head has a measurable effect on your cognitive and emotional state, and through those on your autonomic state. Research using electroencephalography, EEG, combined with immersive virtual environments found that a ceiling height of 4 to 5 meters may offer a balanced condition for both neural relaxation and emotional comfort, emphasizing the role of spatial proportion and perception. Lower ceilings, the kind found in many modern offices, in corridors, in the institutional spaces that proliferate in contemporary architecture, are associated with measurably higher neural arousal indicators, with a quality of attentional narrowing that is also a characteristic of the vigilant state. High ceilings, paradoxically, do something different. They seem to open something in cognition, associated with broader, more associative thinking, with what researchers have called high construal level thinking, a kind of expansiveness that is the cognitive correlate of the autonomic state of safety and rest. The body, it seems, reads vertical space as a signal of openness and freedom from confinement. Low ceilings press something down in the nervous system. High ceilings allow it to rise. This is not merely a Western or culturally specific response. The fact that grand cathedral ceilings, mosque domes, the soaring interior spaces of Buddhist temples and Hindu mandirs across vastly different cultures all share this principle of vertical grandeur suggests something deeper, an evolved response to spatial scale that transcends the particular aesthetic traditions of any single culture. Acoustic quality ***. Sound is, in some ways, the most powerful and least consciously acknowledged sense when it comes to environmental safety perception. And this is because hearing is the sense that cannot be turned off. You can close your eyes. You cannot close your ears. The auditory environment of a space is constantly present, constantly being processed, constantly feeding into the neuroception system's assessment of whether the environment is safe. Especially at night, our ancestors must have relied primarily on their sense of hearing to monitor the environment for possible danger or threats. The human body needs time to rest and digest. How humans make use of the acoustic information from their environment to evaluate actual danger or safety is a highly interesting though severely under-researched topic. Research into the sounds associated with perceived safety and danger has found some interesting and counterintuitive results. Silence, for example, is not as unambiguously calming as one might expect. In studies where participants were asked to rate the sense of stress and danger associated with different acoustic environments, including silence, natural sounds, and music, silence did not emerge as the clearly safest category. The researchers proposed that this is because silence contains no information. The absence of sound prevents the nervous system from determining whether the environment is safe or not. A quiet predator, a quietly dangerous space, can be silent. Silence is not a signal of safety. It is a signal of ambiguity. What the nervous system appears to prefer are sounds that carry positive information, sounds that indicate a living, active, non-threatening world. Natural soundscapes, flowing water, birdsong, the rustle of wind and leaves, are particularly effective at activating parasympathetic states. The acoustic complexity of a natural environment, the way it fills the sonic space with soft, unpredictable, non-threatening sounds, communicates to the nervous system that there are no nearby predators, that the world within earshot is alive but safe. This is also, incidentally, part of why certain music is so profoundly calming. Music in a low-stimulus acoustic environment functions as a cue of human social presence and safety, a signal that there are other humans nearby, that those humans are not alarmed, that the environment is socially inhabited and therefore safe. The opposite is also true. Low-frequency sounds, the hums and rumbles of HVAC systems, of large machinery, of urban infrastructure, activate a background arousal state in the nervous system. They are interpreted at a very low level as signals of potential danger. Environmental noise exposure and subsequent mental stress cause a stress reaction through activation of either the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis with subsequent cortisol release, or by activation of the sympathetic nervous system. Hospital noise research has found that elevated sound levels in clinical settings can increase heart and respiratory rates, blood pressure, and cortisol levels in patients. The sonic environment of a space is a direct physiological stressor or regulator, and it affects the autonomic state in ways that are measurable and significant. The acoustic quality of a space that feels genuinely safe tends to have certain characteristics. It is complex but not overwhelming. It contains identifiable sounds rather than unidentifiable ones. It has good reverberation characteristics that allow sounds to be located precisely, and it tends toward the natural, the organic, the humanly recognizable. Spatial openness and the question of being seen ****. There is another dimension to the nervous system's reading of space that is perhaps the most evolutionary ancient of all, and it has to do with a specific dual requirement that is almost paradoxically simple: to see and not to be seen. J. Appleton, a geographer at the University of Hull in the UK, described this in his 1975 book, The Experience of Landscape, through what he called prospect-refuge theory. His theory proposes that humans are naturally drawn to spaces that give them opportunities to respond to their needs for reviewing their surrounding environment for potential opportunities. Prospect without being visible, refuge, something that creates a sense of safety. In short, we are drawn to spaces that provide both clear views of the environment and a sense of enclosure. This dual need for prospect and refuge simultaneously explains an enormous number of our spatial preferences. Why we prefer to sit facing the door in a restaurant rather than with our back to it. Why we prefer seats against walls rather than in the middle of open spaces. Why a corner table in a cafe feels more comfortable than a table in the center of the room. Why the most beloved architectural spaces across cultures seem to combine openness with shelter, broad vistas with protected enclosures. The body wants to be able to see what is coming, and simultaneously it wants to be sheltered, held, protected from approach from behind. These are ancient survival needs, and they are still embedded in the nervous system's reading of space. Functional MRI studies confirm that pleasant, coherent environments activate brain regions linked to positive emotion more strongly. Architecture speaks to the senses and to the brain. A space that provides strong prospect, wide views, clear sight lines, good lighting, no hidden areas behind. Without refuge, no back wall, exposed to approach from multiple directions, no sense of enclosure, feels exposed, vulnerable, even if there is no identifiable threat. The nervous system is scanning for the ability to see threats before they arrive, and finding nothing to protect the back, it cannot fully stand down. A space that provides strong refuge, enclosed, sheltered, protected, without prospect. No windows, unclear sight lines, enclosed in a way that limits visibility of what might approach. Feels trapped, claustrophobic. The nervous system cannot scan the environment, cannot know what is coming, and so it cannot stand down either. The golden combination, the spatial condition that most powerfully activates the neuroceptive sense of safety, is both clear views, protected position, the experience of being able to see while being sheltered from being seen. a window seat in a warm corner, a porch with a view, the chair at the back of the cafe from which the entire room is visible. These are not accidents of taste. They are the body's ancient requirements, still present in the contemporary nervous system, still shaping where we sit and where we feel at peace. Materials, temperature, and the other senses ***. The visual and auditory channels carry the most obvious environmental information, but they are not the only ones. Touch, temperature, and smell contribute in profound ways to the nervous system's assessment of a space. Warm materials, wood, stone, textiles, things with texture and variation, activate what we might call haptic safety cues. Warm textures offer comfort. Sterile or monotonous palettes can alienate. Smooth, cold, uniform surfaces, metal, glass, polished concrete in large unbroken planes, tend to activate a kind of autonomic alertness, a low-grade arousal that is not threatening but is not restful either. Temperature itself is a powerful regulator of autonomic state. Cool temperatures activate the sympathetic system slightly, increasing alertness. Warmth, within a comfortable range, activates the parasympathetic system, slowing heart rate, relaxing muscles, inducing the physical sensation of safety that is also the sensation of being warm enough, of not needing to expend metabolic resources on staying warm. And smell, the most evolutionarily ancient of the senses, the one most directly connected to the limbic system, to memory, to emotional associations. Smell reads a space in ways that bypass the cortex almost entirely. The olfactory nerve connects directly to the amygdala and the hippocampus, two structures at the heart of emotional memory and threat detection. A smell that was present during a safe, warm, comforting experience is, neurologically, a safety signal. Without any conscious recognition or deliberate memory retrieval, the smell of a particular food, or a particular wood, or a particular combination of earth and rain can shift the autonomic state towards safety before you even know you are remembering anything. All of these channels, visual, auditory, tactile, thermal, olfactory, are feeding simultaneously into the continuous neuroceptive scan. And they combine in ways that are not merely additive. They interact, creating an overall gestalt of the space's safety or danger that is more than the sum of its individual signals. There is a history written in what we find beautiful, a paleontological record inscribed in our aesthetic preferences, in the spaces that feel right and the ones that feel wrong. And it is very, very old. The evolutionary basis for human environmental preferences has been a subject of scientific inquiry for decades. Several influential theoretical frameworks have emerged, and while they differ in their details, they converge on a central insight. Human preferences for certain kinds of spaces are not arbitrary, not purely cultural, not entirely learned. They appear to reflect, at some level, the environmental conditions under which the human nervous system evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. The savanna hypothesis, developed by researchers including John Balling and John Falk, proposes that humans have an innate preference for savanna-like environments. Open grasslands with scattered trees, good visibility, access to water, and a balance between open prospect and sheltering refuge. The hypothesis was supported by cross-cultural research. When participants in Nigeria were shown photographs of 5 different biomes, rainforest, deciduous forest, coniferous forest, savanna, and desert, subjects overwhelmingly selected savanna scenes as representing the most desirable place to live. This preference appeared to some degree across cultures, suggesting an innate component. The evolutionary logic is straightforward. Our ancestors spent hundreds of thousands of years, possibly millions of years, in environments that offered the combination of open visibility for spotting threats and prey, access to water, fertile ground, and the shelter of trees and elevated ground. The nervous systems that were calibrated to feel comfortable in those environments survived and reproduced. The nervous systems calibrated to feel comfortable in dense jungle, where visibility was minimal, or in open desert, where shelter was absent, faced different survival pressures. Over deep evolutionary time, the argument goes, a preference for certain environmental conditions became embedded in the nervous system. Not in genes per se, or not only in genes, but in the calibration of the neuroceptive system, in what kinds of spatial signals register as safe versus threatening. The prospect refuge theory describes the human behavioral and psychological need for places that allow a person to see, but without being seen. Prospect and refuge are the important aspects of a landscape to improve the chances of survival. This ancient preference for seeing without being seen shows up in research on sleeping positions. For example, studies examining people's preferred bed positions in a room consistently find that people tend to choose positions from which they can see the door without being visible from the door, maximizing prospect while maximizing refuge. This is not consciously reasoned. It is a bodily preference, expressed in how we arrange ourselves in space without thinking about why. The same preference shows up in where we choose to sit in public spaces, in what kinds of rooms we find most comfortable, in what architectural features we consistently find beautiful across cultures: the alcove, the niche, the sheltered viewpoint, the room with a view, the porch, the balcony, the window seat. All of them, at root, are expressions of the same ancient biological requirement: to be in a position to see what is coming, and to be protected while doing so. There is another dimension to the evolutionary story that deserves exploration: the role of coherence and complexity in the brain's aesthetic assessment of environments. Researchers studying the Kaplan information processing theory of landscape preference, developed by Stephen and Rachel Kaplan, environmental psychologists who worked for decades on human preferences for natural settings, found that people consistently prefer environments with a specific combination of coherence, complexity, legibility, and mystery. Coherence, the sense that the elements of the environment hang together in a meaningful pattern, is perhaps the most basic safety signal. A coherent environment can be understood. Its elements do not contradict each other, do not generate the kind of perceptual dissonance that signals either cognitive limitation or genuine environmental complexity of the kind that might conceal threat. A chaotic or incoherent environment, one in which patterns are inconsistent, elements are randomly arranged, the sensory information does not cohere into a comprehensible whole, registers as more threatening, even if it contains no objective threat. The brain works harder to model it, and the effort of modeling an incoherent environment is, in itself, a low-grade stressor. Complexity, the presence of sufficient varied detail to sustain attention and reward exploration, is the counterbalance to coherence. An environment can be too simple, too uniform, too devoid of variation to sustain engagement. These environments feel alien, sterile, and in their own way slightly threatening. The threat of monotony, of sensory deprivation, of an environment that provides so little information it cannot be read at all. The ideal environment, from the perspective of the nervous system's preferences, is one that is rich enough to be interesting but coherent enough to be comprehensible. This is partly why certain natural environments are so universally preferred. Old-growth forests, beaches, mountainsides with scattered vegetation, rivers. These spaces are at once richly complex and deeply coherent. Their complexity follows patterns. Their patterns are deep and recognizable. The nervous system can read them, can model them, can know where it stands within them, and in that knowing can rest. Legibility, the sense that a space can be navigated, that its larger organization can be grasped, that it is possible to know where you are and how to move through it, is a safety signal of a specific kind. An illegible environment, one where you cannot form a cognitive map, where each successive view offers no information about the next, where orientation is consistently frustrated. This is an environment that keeps the nervous system in a state of low-grade alertness. Not fear, but the particular unease of not knowing where you are, of not being able to model what might come from what direction. And mystery, a quality that sounds opposed to safety, but in this framework is not, is the allure of depth, of the sense that further exploration would reward, of the suggestion that there is more to find beyond the current view. A forest path curving out of sight, a corridor with light visible at the end, the promise of further legibility, further coherence, available through movement and exploration. Mystery in this sense is not threatening. It is an invitation, and the nervous system reads it as such when it is paired with sufficient coherence and prospect to suggest that exploration would be survivable. The combination of these qualities, coherence, complexity, legibility, mystery, describes not just natural environments but the built spaces that feel most consistently safe and restorative across cultures and individuals. The great public libraries, the university quadrangles, the old markets and bazaars, the cathedrals with their forests of stone pillars, the low-lit restaurants with their acoustic warmth and their layered spatial depth. All of them, in their different ways, hit the same notes. All of them speak to the same ancient biological requirements for the experience of safe space. This is perhaps the most elegant aspect of all of this science. The nervous system has been carrying, in its deepest calibrations, a detailed specification of what the ideal environment looks and sounds and feels like. That specification was written by evolution over enormous spans of time. And it turns out that the environments humans have found most beautiful, most calming, most restoring throughout all of recorded history are environments that meet that specification. But evolution is not the only author of these preferences. Individual history writes deeply too. And the intersection of these two forces, the evolutionary and the personal, is where the most intimate and surprising aspects of spatial safety live. Memory, safety, and the places that already know us. There is a house, or perhaps it is an apartment or a single room, or just a stretch of hallway with a particular smell that your nervous system already knows is safe. Not because you have analyzed it, not because you have thought carefully about its lighting or its acoustic properties or its sightlines, but because you were there when you were young and your nervous system learned safety in that space, and that learning has never fully left. The neuroscience of this is beautiful and slightly melancholy in equal measure. When we encounter a place from our past, or even a place that carries the sensory signatures of a place from our past, a remarkable process unfolds in the brain. The hippocampus, which is centrally involved in both spatial navigation and the encoding and retrieval of autobiographical memory, activates its stored representations of that place. The amygdala, with its direct access to emotional memories, retrieves the emotional coloring of the original experience. And the reward system, the substantia nigra, the ventral tegmental area, the striatum, begins releasing dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation and the general feeling that something good is happening. Research using functional MRI imaging has demonstrated that nostalgia-related activity occurs in both memory and reward systems, including the hippocampus, substantia nigra/ventral tegmental area, and ventral striatum, when people experience nostalgic feelings in response to childhood-related visual stimuli. This is why returning to your childhood home, or to any space where you were once consistently safe, can produce that particular feeling that defies easy description. It is comfort, but it is more than comfort. It is a kind of recognition that goes deeper than thought. The nervous system recognizes the space before the mind has finished registering that it is back somewhere it has been. The neuroceptive scan matches what it finds against deep-stored templates of safety, and the match activates a physiological shift toward rest. The simplicity of the triggers for nostalgia should not be underestimated. Things like full bellies, nights of good sleep, or afternoons of peaceful puttering leave permanent signposts guiding us back to experiences of goodness and comfort. And sensory data from those safe places, the specific smell of an old kitchen, the way light entered a certain window at a certain time of afternoon, the particular creak of a floor or the sound of rain on a specific kind of roof. These sensory details are encoded alongside the emotional experience of being safe. And when they are encountered again, even decades later, they do not merely remind you of safety. They reinstate it physiologically in the body. This is why certain cafes feel like home even when they are not yours. The light is similar. The quality of the background sound is similar. The scale of the space is familiar. Something in the combination resonates with a stored template of comfort, and the nervous system responds not to the cafe itself but to what the cafe resembles neurologically in its databases. Now consider the opposite, the hospital corridor. The hospital corridor is, in some ways, a perfect study in the environmental conditions that prevent the nervous system from settling into safety. The lighting is bright, overhead, fluorescent. The kind of light associated with maximum alertness with the body's stress response with cortisol production. Research specifically on fluorescent lighting found that anxiety patients are significantly affected by fluorescent light, feeling uncomfortable and preferring to either leave the place with fluorescent light or try to adapt. The general association of fluorescent light with hospitals, schools, and institutional settings creates, over time, a conditioned association. The light itself becomes a trigger for the low-grade vigilance state that those settings tend to activate. The corridors are long, often without clear landmarks, symmetrical in ways that make spatial navigation difficult. The acoustic environment is challenging. Hospital noise levels have been documented as significantly exceeding those recommended for patient rest, and elevated noise levels have been shown to increase heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure, and cortisol in patients. The corridors often have no prospect. You cannot see the end from the middle, you cannot know what is around each corner. You are moving through a space that provides information only incrementally, one section at a time. There is no refuge, no corner to settle into with your back protected and a clear view of the approach. The corridor is a passage designed purely for movement and clinical function, and what it does to the nervous system is, in essence, what the research would predict. It maintains it at a low level of vigilance, a low-grade sympathetic activation, a state that is not full fear but is very far from rest. And this matters for healing, because healing requires the parasympathetic state, requires rest and digest, requires the biological conditions of safety. A patient whose nervous system is chronically activated by its environment heals more slowly, requires more pain medication, reports more distress. Research reviewed by the Center for Health Design found that even a view of nature from a window, a simple modification, a passive thing, significantly affected patient recovery. Patients with views of trees and natural landscapes recovered faster and required less medication than those facing brick walls. The space is not neutral. The space is medicine, or it is the opposite. Why certain places ground us, and why that matters. Between the extremes of the childhood home and the institutional corridor, there is a vast range of spaces that most of us navigate every day. And within that range, there are particular places, often modest ones, often seemingly unremarkable, that the nervous system consistently finds restoring. The particular cafe that feels right. Not every cafe, not cafes in general, but this one, with its specific combination of light and sound and spatial arrangement and the particular material of the tables and the way the other customers are arranged and the smell of coffee and wood and warm air. That cafe, for whatever combination of reasons, personal history, evolutionary preference, the specific alignment of sensory signals with the nervous system's template of safety. That cafe does something to the autonomic state that is measurable and real. The nervous system down-regulates. Heart rate slows. Breathing deepens. Muscle tension releases. The quality of thought changes. It becomes more associative, more creative, less narrowly vigilant. The sense of time loosens. You are in a place that your nervous system has registered as safe. And what is happening in biological terms is not just pleasant. It is restorative. The parasympathetic state, the rest and digest state activated by the vagus nerve when environmental conditions signal safety, is the state in which the body does its most essential maintenance. Immune function improves. Cellular repair processes activate. The inflammatory cascades associated with chronic stress slow or cease. Memory consolidation happens. Emotional processing deepens. The body literally uses the physiological state of safety to become more itself, more whole, more capable of everything it is designed to do. This is why we seek these places, why we return to them, why they matter not just in the experience of the moment, but in the long arc of health and function. It is also why sleep matters so profoundly in all of this. The deepest state of safety the nervous system can achieve. The deepest parasympathetic activation, the deepest vagal tone, the deepest rest occurs during sleep. And the quality of that sleep depends in part on the environment in which it happens. The room, its light, its sound, its temperature, its spatial qualities, its smell. All of it continues to feed into the neuroceptive system even during sleep, maintaining the autonomic state at a level that either allows the body to go as deep as it needs to go, or keeps it slightly alert, slightly vigilant, slightly unable to fully let go. The room where you sleep is perhaps the most consequential environment in your life. Not because of what you do in it, but because of what it does to you while you are not doing anything. While the system is supposed to rest. And yet most people spend almost no conscious thought on the sensory environment of the room where they sleep. The color temperature of the light, whether there are sounds that are identifiable and thus manageable, or sounds that are ambiguous and therefore arousing. Whether the room provides clear sight lines or hidden areas that the nervous system's nighttime scanning finds uncomfortable. Whether the temperature supports the body's natural nocturnal cooling cycle or works against it. Sleep is the body's deepest safety state, and the environment in which sleep occurs either supports or undermines the nervous system's ability to reach that state and stay in it. Consider what the nervous system is doing during sleep. It is not offline. It is not quiet. The unconscious neuroceptive scan continues even in sleep. This is an evolutionarily ancient feature of the sleeping mammalian brain, designed to detect significant changes in the environment that might represent threat, and to rouse the sleeping organism if those changes cross a threshold. The sleeping brain continues to monitor sound, continues to respond to temperature changes, continues to track the presence or absence of other organisms nearby. This is why we are so sensitive to sound during sleep. Why a door creaking at 3 in the morning wakes us when traffic noise does not. The nervous system has been calibrated to respond to sounds that are novel, unpatterned, and potentially significant. The sound of something entering the room, the sound of something unexpected, and to habituate to sounds that are regular, predictable, and consistent with the nightly pattern of the environment. The acoustic environment of the bedroom, in this sense, matters not just for falling asleep, but for the quality of sleep throughout the night. A room with consistent, soft, natural pattern sound, or with genuine quiet, is a room where the neuroceptive scan can run quietly in the background without finding anything to report. A room with unpredictable, variable, or low-frequency noise is a room where the scan is continuously receiving potential threat signals and continuously having to evaluate them, and this evaluation, even when it does not wake the sleeper consciously, disrupts the depth and architecture of sleep. The light of a bedroom matters in similar ways, not just before sleep but during it. The eye remains responsive to light during sleep, and light, even through closed eyelids, can shift the sleep stage, can prevent the deepest, most restorative stages of sleep from occurring or sustaining. A bedroom that admits street light or morning light before the body is ready to wake is a bedroom in which the nervous system's safety scan is receiving arousal signals even as the body is attempting its deepest rest. Temperature, which we noted as a significant autonomic regulator in waking life, is perhaps even more important during sleep. The body's core temperature follows a circadian pattern, naturally declining as sleep approaches and reaching its lowest point in the early hours of the morning. This temperature decline is part of the biological signal for sleep, and environments that interfere with it, rooms that are too warm, or that do not allow the body to achieve its natural nocturnal cooling, disturb the sleep architecture and prevent the deepest stages from being reached. All of these factors, light, sound, temperature, the spatial arrangement of the room, its materials and smells, are not separate from the science we have been exploring. They are the same science applied to the specific context of sleep. The neuroceptive system does not take a break during sleep, continues to read the room, and the room continues to speak. The neuroscience of grounding places a deeper look. There is a word that gets used in certain clinical and psychological contexts that is worth examining through the lens of everything we have covered tonight. Grounding. When therapists or mindfulness practitioners speak of grounding, they typically mean a process of bringing the nervous system back to the present moment, back to the body, back to sensory reality. Techniques of grounding often involve attending to the immediate sensory environment. noticing what you can see, what you can hear, what you can feel, as a way of interrupting the spiraling quality of anxious thought and reestablishing the nervous system in the present. But what the neuroscience reveals is that certain physical environments do this automatically, without any deliberate technique, without conscious intention. Certain spaces are simply grounding in themselves. The body enters them and the nervous system downshifts. The scanning quiets. The depth of breath increases. The quality of time changes. What are these spaces doing? They are providing a rich, coherent, non-threatening sensory environment. They are giving the neuroceptive system enough high-quality information to determine that the situation is safe, and they are doing so through every sensory channel simultaneously, creating an overwhelming case for safety rather than merely an absence of alarm signals. Consider a forest, or an old garden, or a bookshop with high shelves and warm, imperfect light and the smell of paper and dust and old wood. The sensory complexity of these environments is high, but it is coherent. Every element reinforces the others. The sounds are layered and soft and identifiable. The light is warm and variable and natural. The scale is human. There are clear elements of both prospect. You can see significant distances, the environment is legible, and refuge. There are sheltered areas, enclosed spaces, things at your back that protect you from approach. The temperature is comfortable. The smells carry no threat. The surfaces are varied and textured and warm. The neuroceptive system scans this environment and finds, in every direction, every sensory channel, evidence of safety. And under the weight of all that consistent evidence, the vigilance relaxes. The parasympathetic system activates. The vagus nerve begins its calming work. The body shifts measurably into a different state. This is not a mystery. It is biology. And it explains why certain spaces, old buildings, certain kinds of natural environments, spaces with warmth and texture and coherence and human scale, have a reputation for being restorative that goes far beyond mere aesthetic preference. They are genuinely therapeutic, not metaphorically, not merely in the experiential sense, but in the measurable, physiological, autonomically real sense. The body that spends time in environments that consistently signal safety is a body that has more opportunity to do the deep work of restoration, repair, and regulation that its biology requires. And conversely, the body that spends most of its waking hours in environments that fail to signal safety, the body that moves from fluorescent office to blaring commute to sensory-overloaded public space to under-resourced bedroom. That body is a body that has fewer opportunities for genuine autonomic recovery. It accumulates a kind of physiological debt, a deficit of safety experience, that manifests over time as fatigue, as emotional dysregulation, as a persistent quality of vague unease that seems to have no cause. The cause is the room, or the accumulated experience of many rooms, none of which told the nervous system it could rest. Now consider the reverse. A person who has a reliable grounding space, a room of their own that they have, consciously or not, arranged to provide the conditions of safety. A familiar cafe, a particular route through a park, a corner of a library. That person is also a person whose nervous system has regular access to restoration, whose vagus nerve gets to do its work, whose parasympathetic system gets to run without constant interruption by environmental threat signals. The capacity for emotional regulation, for clear thinking, for sustained kindness and patience and creativity, All of these are enhanced by regular access to physiological safety. They are diminished by its chronic absence. This is not self-indulgence. It is maintenance. The same maintenance that eating provides for metabolic function, that sleep provides for neural function. The nervous system requires a regular experience of safety in order to regulate itself. And much of that experience is delivered by the environment. This is perhaps the most practically important insight in all of this science. The spaces you inhabit are not neutral. They are active inputs into your physiological state, continuously affecting your health, your cognition, your emotional life, your capacity for everything you care about being capable of. Attending to them thoughtfully with some understanding of what the nervous system is actually looking for is not a luxury. It is a form of care for yourself that is grounded in some of the deepest biology of what it means to be a human nervous system moving through the world. Designing safety into space. All of this raises a practical question. If the nervous system's sense of safety is so deeply tied to environmental signals, to light, to sound, to scale, to prospect and refuge, to temperature and material, then it should be possible, at least to some degree, to design environments that signal safety. And the answer broadly is yes. This is the project of the field of neuroarchitecture. And while it is young, it is producing findings that are beginning to reshape how hospitals, schools, clinics, workplaces, and homes are designed. Some of the principles are straightforward translations of the science. Natural light, or artificial light that mimics the warmth and color temperature of natural light, is consistently more regulating than cool fluorescent light. Research on hospital design has found that access to natural light, through windows, through skylights, through light wells in deep plan buildings, is associated with better patient outcomes, reduced medication use, shorter lengths of stay, and higher staff well-being. Acoustic design that minimizes harsh, unlocatable, and low-frequency sounds, and that maximizes the presence of natural sounds, soft background sound, or strategically positioned absorptive materials that prevent the hard, disorienting echoes of institutional spaces, is consistently associated with reduced cortisol, reduced autonomic arousal, reduced patient distress. Spatial proportions that honor both prospect and refuge, that give occupants clear sight lines while providing sheltered, bounded positions, appear to activate parasympathetic states more reliably than either open-plan exposure or claustrophobic enclosure. The evidence from EEG studies using virtual reality environments suggests that rooms with moderate ceiling heights, significantly higher than standard commercial ceiling heights, but not cathedral scale, natural materials, and good visual connectivity to the outside consistently produce lower arousal indicators and higher reported comfort. Various studies conducted in hospitals show that patients with visual access to gardens or natural landscapes recover faster and require less medication. In work environments, offices with natural light and vegetation increase productivity and reduce absenteeism. And in homes, spaces that combine order, warmth, and natural materials promote deeper rest and more harmonious coexistence. The implications extend beyond individual buildings. Urban spaces, parks, the design of cities, all of them are, in a real biological sense, environments that the nervous system is continuously reading. The degree to which they provide or deny the conditions for neuroceptive safety has measurable effects on public health, on mental health, on the quality of life of the populations who inhabit them. A park with old trees, open lawns, clear sight lines, and sheltered seating areas against edges is not merely aesthetic. It is a physiological environment, one that activates the safety state in the nervous systems of everyone who uses it, and that thereby contributes quietly, passively, continuously to their health. The field of therapeutic landscaping and the broader movement toward biophilic design that incorporates natural elements, natural light, views of nature, natural materials, and the acoustic complexity of natural environments into built spaces, is, in essence, an attempt to restore to the modern built environment the environmental cues that the nervous system evolved to read as safety. We spend approximately 90% of our lives inside built environments. The nervous system is reading every one of them continuously without being asked to, and shifting its state in response. How those environments are designed is not a trivial matter. It is one of the most significant determinants of human well-being, and it has been proceeding largely without explicit reference to the biology that makes it so. Memory and design ****. There is one more dimension to consider in this conversation about design safety, and it is perhaps the most subtle. It is the role of memory, of the personal and cultural encoding that makes certain aesthetic choices feel safe not because of their objective physical properties, but because of what they have come to mean. The warm, rough texture of a hand-thrown ceramic mug, the smell of wood and old paper in a library, the specific amber tone of afternoon light through old glass. These are not universally calming. They are calming to specific nervous systems that were taught their meaning by specific histories. Design that acknowledges this complexity, that makes room for the individual and cultural layers of meaning alongside the evolutionary universals, is design that can reach deeper into the nervous system's archives of safety. The best spaces are not those that apply neuroscience as a formula, but those that combine scientific understanding of the evolutionary universals with sensitivity to the particular population inhabiting them, their histories, their cultural aesthetics, their individual experiences of what safe looks and sounds and feels like. There is also a temporal dimension to this that deserves acknowledgement. The nervous system's relationship to a space changes over time. A place that initially feels slightly unfamiliar may, through repeated visit and accumulated positive experience, become one of the stored templates of safety. This is how a new home gradually begins to feel like home, not through any single transformation, but through the accumulation of ordinary moments in which the neuroceptive scan runs and finds nothing to report, in which the body gradually deposits a record of having been safe there, in which the room becomes neuronally a known place. This process cannot be forced, but it can be supported. By choosing environments that already carry as many of the universal safety signals as possible: warm light, natural materials, appropriate scale, good acoustic character, clear sight lines, we give the nervous system the conditions it needs to begin building its own archive of safety in that place. Over time, the room and the nervous system reach a kind of accommodation. The room learns what the body needs, in the sense that the body gradually calibrates its response to the room's specific signals. And the experience of being in that room becomes not just neutral but actively restorative, because the room has become, through the slow work of repeated experience, a stored template of safety. There is no single room that is safe for every nervous system, but there are principles: light, sound, scale, prospect and refuge, warmth, connection to the natural world, that create the conditions for safety across a wide range of nervous systems, and that, when applied thoughtfully, can transform environments from merely functional into genuinely restorative. And that transformation matters more than most of us have understood. what the body is always doing. We have traveled a long way tonight. From the moment you step across a threshold and feel something shift in your chest, all the way down into the oldest parts of the brain. Through the amygdala's preconscious alarm system, through the concept of neuroception and its continuous environmental audit, through the vagus nerve's wandering path from brainstem to gut, through the evolutionary origins of our preference for certain kinds of spaces, through the neuroscience of how memory makes certain places feel like safety and others like exposure. And what emerges from all of it is something that is both very simple and very profound. Your body is always listening. Right now, as these words settle into the quiet around you, your nervous system is performing its continuous scan. It is reading the temperature of the air and the quality of the sound and the level of light and the distance to the nearest wall and whether there are people nearby and whether those people seem calm or alarmed. It is matching all of these signals against its deep stored templates. The evolutionary templates laid down over hundreds of thousands of years of human prehistory, and the personal templates built up over the course of your particular life. And based on what it finds, it is shifting your physiological state. Subtly, continuously, without announcement or drama, tilting you slightly toward safety or slightly toward vigilance, slightly toward rest or slightly toward readiness. The shift may be small, but it is never absent. Safety is not a thought. It is a signal. And the body is always receiving. What the neuroscience reveals at depth is that the feeling of safety is biological before it is psychological. It is physiological before it is emotional. It is a state of the body's internal environment, a configuration of autonomic function, of hormonal balance, of vagal tone, that the environment can activate or inhibit, but that ultimately originates inside the body itself. You cannot think your way into safety. You cannot reason the nervous system into rest, but you can create the conditions for it. You can put yourself in environments that speak the right language, that emit the signals your neuroceptive system is calibrated to read as safe. Warm light, protected position, clear sight lines, soft, natural sounds, spaces that are human in scale, connected to the natural world, textured with the materials of the living earth. And you can, over time, build new templates of safety. The nervous system is not fixed. Its calibrations are not permanent. New experiences in new spaces can teach it new meanings, can expand its archive of what safe looks like, can gently recalibrate a system that has been stuck in low-grade vigilance towards something more capable of rest. This is why it matters where you sleep, why it matters where you eat, why it matters where you spend the hours that are supposed to restore you. Not because the space is everything, but because the space is never nothing. The nervous system lives in a body, and the body lives in space, and the space is always talking. The question is only whether we are listening. The body that listens, a closing reflection. There is something quietly astonishing about what we have covered tonight. The fact that your body has an opinion about every room you have ever entered. That this opinion was formed before you consciously registered anything. That it is the product of hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary refinement, of your individual life history, of the specific calibrations of your particular nervous system, all of it processing at a speed that thought cannot match, in neural structures that predate the invention of language by a geological eternity. The rooms you have felt safest in, the rooms that made you want to leave immediately, the corridors that put your shoulders up toward your ears without you noticing. The particular light of a late afternoon in a specific kitchen that made something in you release. All of it is neurological, biological, real. Safety is not a soft concept. It is not a luxury. It is not a preference. It is, in the most literal biological sense, the condition under which the body can be most fully alive. The condition under which healing happens, memory consolidates, emotions process, immune function operates, the deep maintenance of being a living body gets done. The nervous system is not a passive receptor. It is an active scanner, a continuous reader of environmental signals, a system that is literally measuring the world for the conditions that allow it to rest. And when it finds those conditions, the right light, the right sound, the right scale, the right memory, the right combination of prospect and refuge, it exhales. Not metaphorically, physically. The heart slows, the breath deepens, the muscles release, the body knows it is home. What we have been exploring tonight has another layer, though. One that emerges quietly from the biology we have described, but that deserves to be named directly before we close. If the body is always reading the room, always assessing for safety, always calibrating its state based on what the environment is telling it, then the quality of the environments we inhabit over the course of a life is not incidental to our health. It is not a backdrop to our experience. It is an active and ongoing input into who we are, physiologically, at any given moment. The chronic low-grade stress of poorly designed institutional spaces. The restorative power of a well-loved domestic room. The anxiety of never having a quiet, warm, bounded space of one's own. These are not merely experiential categories. They are biological conditions with measurable consequences. This is why the neuroscience of safety has implications far beyond the individual. It speaks to how hospitals are designed, how schools are built, how affordable housing is conceived, how urban planning prioritizes or ignores the environmental conditions that allow nervous systems to rest. The nervous system's need for environmental safety is universal. It is not a preference of the privileged. It is a biological requirement of every human body, regardless of income, culture, or individual history. The astonishing thing about the science of why some places feel safe and others don't is that it reveals something both very ancient and very urgent. Ancient because the system we have been describing has been operating in vertebrate bodies for hundreds of millions of years. Urgent because the built environments most people in the modern world inhabit, the offices and commutes and corridors and apartments of contemporary life, were not designed with this system in mind. They were not designed with the neuroceptive scan in mind. They were not designed with the amygdala's reading of spatial proportions, or the vagus nerve's response to acoustic complexity, or the evolutionary requirement for prospect and refuge in mind. They were designed for other things, for efficiency, for economy, for function in the narrowest sense. And in the process, they have created environments that the body experiences at a level below conscious awareness, as the absence of safety. The science says, this matters. This costs something. Not dramatically, not in ways that are obvious in any single moment, but cumulatively, physiologically, across a lifetime of inhabiting spaces that do not speak the nervous system's language of safety. And the other side of that equation is equally real. Spaces that do speak that language, that offer warmth and natural light and identifiable sound and human scale and the ancient satisfaction of seeing without being seen. Those spaces give something back. They restore something that the body has been using. They allow the nervous system to do the deepest, most essential work of being alive. Tonight, wherever you are, whatever room holds you right now, allow it to hold you. Let the signals it is emitting reach the scanner. Let the scan complete. And if the verdict is safety, if the light is soft and the sound is manageable and there is something solid at your back and the room is familiar enough or warm enough or simply quiet enough, let the body receive that signal. Let the vagus nerve do its work. Let the amygdala stand down. Let the parasympathetic system take over. Let the rest come. The deep, biological, neurologically legitimate rest of a nervous system that has decided, on the basis of everything it can measure, that this moment, this space, this specific arrangement of light and sound and warmth and air, that all of it adds up to one ancient prelinguistic cellular declaration. You are safe here. Rest now. If this exploration of the science behind safety and the nervous system helped you understand yourself a little better tonight, or helped you drift somewhere quieter, please consider leaving a like or a comment below. And if you want more slow, science-grounded explorations just like this one, more nights spent gently inside the neuroscience of being human, subscribe to Deep Science Sleep. Every week, we go somewhere quiet and curious. We will see you there. Asterisk.